Hi, welcome to Book Bites with Maggie. And this week we're going to be talking about some great nonfiction and biography titles and hopefully pique your interest in some books that we have here in the Napanee Public Library collection. If there are any books that we talk about, feel free to leave us a message in the comments here on Facebook Live and we can get those titles on the hold shelf for you to pick up in the next couple of days. Let's get started with some books. Several years ago, Oprah's book club highlighted this title here, and then it went on to become a movie. This is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. This is a medical story about like cells that were used and taken illegally from a woman and used to then go on and create all kinds of cures for different diseases, and is still being used in labs all around the world today. But those cells were taken from a woman without her knowledge, and so the story that this book follows along is how that happened, how she was taken advantage of, and then in the end of the story there's still no reconciliation because her family really wants to be compensated for the advances that Henrietta had made to the medical field. This is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks by Rebecca Skloot. Many library staff have read Fredrik Backman and have become a huge fan of this Swedish author. Most of his books that come to us are written in translation, and this one is going to be the same. If you've read, what's Uwe's full title?
The Man Called Uwe.
The Man Called Uwe is probably his most popular book, followed by the duology of the Beartown series. This is going to be his nonfiction biography, and this is called Things My Son Needs to Know About the World, and it's written almost like a giant letter, kind of cataloging some of the memories they had growing up, stories of things he wants to remember to tell his son when he gets older, and it's just hilarious, and I really enjoyed this story because of the wit and the humor involved. So I hope that you would give this one a shot. If you're a friend of Fredrik Backman or not, this is a great story for families to read, or I guess parents of families. So this is Things My Son Needs to Know About the World by Fredrik Backman. And if you like to read books in translation, this would be a good one because all of his books come in Swedish, translated into the English language.
We're going to scoot a little bit. Pat said our sound is a little iffy.
Okay. I'm going to keep talking here. You let us know how the volume is. Today on Book Bites, we're talking about nonfiction titles, including biographies, here in our Napanee Public Library collection. How's our sound now, Miss Pat?
She said she loves Bachman.
I think she's already read that one, maybe. Okay, our next title here is another medical story. This one was recommended to me by a friend. This is Bellevue, 3 Centuries of Medicine and Mayhem at America's Most Storied Hospital by David Oshinsky. And this book, it's like 400 pages with all the excerpts at the back, some citations and things like that. 350 pages. This story had me absolutely riveted. So it takes place in the Bellevue Hospital, and if you've ever been to New York City, you know this kind of a landmark, but it's not one where people go. And I honestly, after reading this story, would love to visit this hospital because of all the information and the history that I learned in this story. So it follows David as he's going to tell the story and the history of the Bellevue Hospital. Back when it was first built and went into operation back by the Civil War, all the way to currently, you actually learn about different staff members, some of the crimes that happened there, pandemics that they have been through, and different plagues and things like that. And up until this story was written, it's a couple years old now, so obviously COVID-19 is not included in this story, but I would love to hear an additional excerpt written maybe as an update to this and how Bellevue has been coping with this in New York City. But it does mention some of the other pandemics and things that we've had to go through as a country. And the hospital itself only ever closed 2 days in over the century of being opened. It's only closed for 2 days. You got to wrap your head around that. Even when there was major flooding and the hospital was underwater up several floors, they only had to close for just 1 day until the water receded past the level. I think it was the 11th floor where the generators were at. So great story, totally riveting, and I've recommended this one to many people who have visited the library. This is Bellevue, 3 Centuries of Medicine and Mayhem at the America's Most Storied Hospital by David Oshinsky. If this is a title you'd like, just let us know in the comments and we can put it on hold for you. Okay, the last 2 years, Lisa Wingate has been a very sought-after author, and sometimes we've had people waiting 3 or 4 people deep in our hold list to get their hands on Before We Were Yours. And that is a fictionalized story from a historical event that took place in Tennessee at the Children's Home Society. Georgia Tan was the owner and operator of that establishment, and she ended up being charged with some serious crimes, but died before she was put on trial for all those things. So what happens in Before We Were Yours is some kids are taken who are not they're taken from their own front yards and put into like an orphanage. And Georgia Tan and her people that help her run this children's home then place those children in homes of whoever will pay for them. So it is a very, very, very sad story. That one led to a whole bunch of people who actually lived through that historical event of the Tennessee Children's Home Society, and they came forward, talked to Lisa, and between her and another investigative journalist, Judy Christie, they actually put together a meeting, and they were able to catalog a whole bunch of real life stories of kids who had experienced Georgia Tan and the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And they wrote this book. This one has just come out in the last year or so. And I do have somebody waiting to read it right now. But we can put you on the hold list for it. And if you really liked to read that story, this one is a follow-up. But can definitely be read separately. But I do recommend reading it after the first book because of all of the things that are mentioned in the fictionalized story and how they related to the real life story. So this one is Before and After, the incredible real life stories of orphans who survived the Tennessee Children's Home Society by Judy Christie and Lisa Wingate, who was the author of the fictionalized historical version. Okay, guys, this was one of my favorites of this year so far. Mike Rowe, if you are familiar with Dirty Jobs, at all, he is a familiar face because he's been on your TVs in your living rooms and he has made you laugh. This is the way I heard it, and it is written very, very similarly to his podcast. Lots of chapters are tidbit information. It's a mix between like oddity stories and stories and how they connect to him personally. So it's like a miniature biography mixed with things that he's learned along the way. And he actually wrote this book while in an airplane, flying high above the clouds. And I read this one as an audiobook. So it's going to be on Overdrive and Libby, and you can actually listen to him read it himself on that format. But this story absolutely made me laugh. When I actually picked up the physical book, I noticed there are some illustrations inside of it. And I got a really big kick out of this story. I think you would like it too. It's found in nonfiction, even though it does have some biography elements to it. If this is a title you would like to read, let us know in the comments and we can get it on hold for you. Just yesterday, we also got in a brand new book that we're going to be having on our shelves pretty quickly, and it's about his mom. It is his mom's story about probably raising Mike as a son. So this is Mike Rowe, The Way I Heard It, and we do have it in multiple formats. Okay. I love to craft. If you've come to any of our Napanee Public Library programs, you've probably, maybe even unintentionally, been a part of this next book. The Artful Parent is actually a blog that I have followed, goodness, before I even had children, so years and years. And she wrote 2 books. So this is Jean Van Holt's book. This is probably my most favorite book in her collection, The Artful Parent, Simple Ways to Fill Your Family's Life with Art and Creativity. And they are step-by-step pictures and instructions in here on different things that you can do at home with your children. And most of the crafts use things that you are already going to have at home. Lego, stamping, squishing flowers, making paint, things like that. A great story, great resource. If you like to read her blogs, you might not have known she has a book, but the pictures themselves kind of bring it all to life. So if you'd rather have a book format over reading or seeing her stuff on Pinterest or on her blog, this would be a great addition to your library stack the next time that you come in. This is The Artful Parent, Simple Ways to Fill Your Family's Life with Art and Creativity by Jean Van Hol. My time hop today actually reminded me of this story. In 2011, I read The Reading Promise, and it is written by Alice Ozma. Her dad is actually a school librarian, or maybe he's retired now, I'm not sure. But books have always been an important part of her life. Well, when she was in elementary school, Alice was tasked by her teacher to spend, I think it was a week, reading back and forth with her dad at bedtime. Even though she felt she was far too old to do that, she took the challenge, and they enjoyed their reading together so much that they made a commitment, a reading promise, to read together every day for as long as possible. This story kind of dialogues and carries on a list of all the books that they read together. And I absolutely love this story because Alice and her dad, they formed a friendship around these books, and they created a relationship amongst themselves that I've never seen anywhere else. It was absolutely amazing, to the point that they read every single night together, read huge series over and over again, and when one of them couldn't be home, they read over the phone to each other. And it goes all the way up until Alice goes to college, and her dad and her read together her first night in college. So the commitment is there. The story takes place over several years, and then this is her first book, and she actually goes on to be an author. So this would be a good story if you like to read books and you like how they're invested in your family. This is The Reading Promise, My Father and the Books That We Shared by Alice Ozma. And I wanted to read a little quote here that I had in my time hop this morning. That is the best part, after all. Even better than holding, touching, and hugging new books is taking them home and reading them in your own bed, under your own covers, and with your own lamp reading shining next to you until someone yells at you to turn it off and get some sleep. I hope you like this book as much as I did. Okay, 2 weeks ago I had the joy of reading I Am Malala. Unfortunately, I had not read it up until that point, but I finally got to it. And this story, it chronicles all the things that you know that were happening in current events, and all the way down to her recovery after being shot by the Taliban. I learned a lot more of backstory through this title. I didn't know as much about her dad and the advocacy that he did before this all happened. So it was very eye-opening, and as much as you know about what you've seen on TV, this is going to give you even more content and history and backstory, and it does have 2 large sections filled with pictures that you can see that were taken that kind of fill in the gaps. So this is I Am Malala, the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. And it is in our biography section, but we also have a young reader's edition in our children's biography section. Okay, this next book here is one that I read as an audiobook on Overdrive and Libby, and I remember finishing it while staying up to watch the ball drop on New Year's Eve. This one is The Boys in the Boat, 9 Americans and Their Epic Quest for Gold in the 1936 Berlin Olympics. And the struggles that these men and the histories and their backstories are all chronicled, but they come together to form a family while they're at college. And the teamwork and the history of the coaches all comes together to tell an amazing story and what it's like in the Olympics. And obviously 1936 was a long time ago, so the Olympics back then compared to what we know and witness as the Olympics today are vastly different. But this was a great story. It also has some, like there's weather and different things that keep them from accomplishing different goals and different races, but they don't let anything stop them. So all the obstacles are overcome, and it is a great story. If you're a fan of Edward Herman, he is the, not the illustrator,
Photographer?
the narrator. He's the narrator of the audiobook. So if you are a fan of his, you might enjoy listening to this just to hear him talk. Okay. Reese Witherspoon had the library book by Susan Orlean as one of her Hello Sunshine books from last year, maybe 2018. This story is a nonfiction title that takes place in the library that was actually set on fire in Los Angeles several years ago. And it's not just about that criminal act. The story is probably 200 pages long, so obviously there's not as much to tell about just that thing, but it gives the history of the Los Angeles Public Library. Some of the things that they have to do as a public entity are described in this, as well as like backstories and human interest stories of the librarians and the people that they come in contact every day. So this is the library book by Susan Orlean. And it was, like I said, a Reese Witherspoon book club pick for Hello Sunshine. And it was a great story. So if you like libraries and you have not read this one, it would be a good one to pick up the next time that you come into the library. This is the library copy of Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. She has written a lot of books, probably closer to a dozen books. Obviously the library book is going to be quite clean, but my personal copy is all highlighted up, lots of notes inside of it. I've read it twice, and each time I read it, something new stands out to me. So this is how to have the courage to be vulnerable and how it transforms the way you live, love, parent, and lead. And it's in our Christian fiction section, but it doesn't have to be read that way. So you can take all the different things and tips inside of this book and really put them and have them applied to your everyday life. This is Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. So for fans of Full House, you are going to recognize this next name. Andrea Barber wrote a book last year. This is called Full Circle, From Hollywood to Real Life and Back Again. And she plays plays Kimmy Gibbler on Full House and on Fuller House most recently. And that's the only character she has ever played. And it kind of fell into her lap. So this story kind of journalizes the friendship that she had with Candace Cameron Bure and Jodie Sweetin, and how they're still lifelong friends today. But not just that. So while she's in Hollywood, it talks about how she had to have a tutor on set and the friendships and things that she developed. And then there's 20 years that passed between when she was in the film industry and when she re-entered the film industry to take on that role again as Kimmy Gibbler. And during that time, she lived many lifetimes, having a struggle with mental illness and being a marathon runner. This story not only was a biography, but it was also inspirational, and her advocacy work for mental illness and even struggling to find her own therapist that worked well for her is chronicled in here. So the story is engaging. You get to laugh, but you also feel a lot of empathy for some of the struggles that she has had to go through in her life, and her divorce and raising a child and all of that. So this is Full Circle, From Hollywood to Real Life and Back Again by Andrea Barber. If there's any of these books that sound good to you, just let us know in the comments and we can put them on hold for you to pick up here at the Napanee Public Library. Our next title here is by Tembi Locke. This is From Scratch. It is Memoirs of Love in Sicily and Finding Home. And I picked up this book because I needed to read a book that included a recipe for one of my book challenges. And this book definitely delivered that. The back section here is all full of recipes that are mentioned that are Italian and Sicilian recipes. And I even went so far as making something that I found in this book and photographing all of these recipes, and they're still in my recipe box at home. This story, it starts out as a love story, and then it becomes a story of mourning and growth and empathy. Losing a spouse is never easy, and losing a spouse to illness can be a long, drawn-out grief process. And this story and the life that Tembi and her husband built together is chronicled inside of it. So there's flashbacks to her making different connections and memories as she's dealing with her grief, but she also ends up moving in with her mother-in-law in Sicily and learning the Sicilian language and trying to raise her daughter in a country that she probably could have totally disconnected from had she not been assertive and keeping her family history alive even after her husband's passing. This is From Scratch, a memoir of love and Sicily and finding home by Tembi Locke. Almost every high schooler has read To Kill a Mockingbird, and just in the last year or so, it has become a graphic novel. If a graphic novel is not a format that you're familiar with, you can catalog it as being a story told in comic books, but it must be thick enough to need a binding, so it can't include magazines, and tells a full story within its pages. So this is a graphic novel that's going to be found in our adult section, our nonfiction section, and it does a great job at taking a story that you may have read once or twice, and it gives it all new life, even though the story doesn't change, by adding in the pictures. This is a book that I sat down and read it just cover to cover, and I feel like even though you may have seen the movies, or you may, like I said, have read the book over and over again, having somebody else kind of add details that you might not have envisioned yourself while reading the book come to life in these pages added a whole new element. So this is a fantastic story that you can read to kind of brush up on the real story of To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and this one just gives it a whole new twist. So this is the graphic novel version. This story here that we're going to highlight next is by Melinda Gates. That would be Bill Gates' wife. She wrote The Moment of Lift. This story was one that I listened to on Libby, and you actually get to hear about the philanthropy work that the Gates Foundation does and how Melinda is able to bring the focus back to the foundation on the things that mean the most to her. So empowering women both in the workplace and for education. This one actually tied in really, really well with Malala, but I was reading that one. But this story, it also goes into the countries, and you get to hear stories about some of the things that the people that they're trying to help, what they've survived and how they're trying to survive different things in their lives, and how the money and the wells that they are able to put in and the schools that they're able to establish can empower people all over the world. And this was a great story. I wish that I would have read it before I had actually visited Seattle, and then I would have maybe had an opportunity to visit the foundation where this one takes place. This is The Moment of Lift, How Empowering Women Changes the World by Melinda Gates. Okay. Jessica Nunemaker's story here, this is Little Indiana, Small Town Destinations, chronicles all over the state of Indiana. And this book actually took place after her blog, so if you've followed her online, she still chronicles different locations around Indiana. There's an indices in the book, though, where if you're looking specifically for a location, you can find it in different places inside of the back of this book. So we're here in Napanee, Indiana, and even Amish Acres is included in Little Indiana. But this is a fun book if you like to add different places to your bucket list. There's everything from restaurants to places that you should visit to tourist landmarks, all within these pages. So this one is Jessica Nunemaker's Little Indiana Small Town Destinations, and she travels all over the place and is still chronicling different places that she has been on weekend trips around the state. This next title is one that had me laughing out loud. So this is The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning, How to Free Yourself and Your Family from a Lifetime of Clutter by Margareta Magnusson. This is also a Swedish story, kind of like how we were talking about things that my son needs to know about the world, comes from that same area. And this story is written from the perspective of a woman who is becoming older. She is considered a pensioner, and she is going through her home and reminiscing about different stories and items that she has in her house that she's collected over a lifetime. And she's getting rid of them and trying to decide what she needs to keep, what she can get away with getting rid of. And she thinks about things in a way that, what will somebody think of me if they find this in my house after I die? So it sounds so morbid. Some sections are kind of morbid, but the rest of it just makes you laugh out loud. The way she tells her story is absolutely hilarious. And she even gives you some tips and tricks on how to get rid of some things that you might not want found in your house. So if you're looking for something that's not Marie Kondo, but you still need to organize and maintain your house and declutter, this might be a story for you. This is The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. Okay, the last book that I wanted to share with you today was added to the library collection after I purchased my own copy. This is the Mermaid Handbook, an alluring treasury of literature, lore, art, recipes, and projects by Carolyn Turgan. It is absolutely beautiful with a gold binding on it, gold leafed pages, and it has a built-in bookmark. And each chapter kind of has its own thing. So like the title says, there's recipes in it, lots of photography, historical references, folklore, old stories, and it's just full of amazing content and different tourist places that you can go and learn about how mermaids have maintained themselves as something that people are still interested in. Hannah Mermaid, one of my favorite modern mermaids, is even cataloged and chronicled inside of this story. She is an activist for underwater, like taking care of the oceans and the animals that live there. So she's putting her mermaiding to work in that capacity. But again, there's historical things in here. There's, like how it was in a Curiosities museum, things that they found in the history. But even so much as doing crafts, centerpieces, and different things like that. All in this story, putting together a mermaid soiree. So just a fun story maybe to read and enjoy if you want something new in your library stack. So next week with Bookweeks, we're going to be talking about some mysteries and some suspenseful books. And I hope that you are able to join us again for another Book Bites with Maggie. We'll see you next time.